It's useless. We're never getting this thing in the air.
The fuel pump pressure is still reading low across the board.
The wrench hit the concrete with a sound like a gunshot. This piece of junk is dead! Kyle Kramer's voice cracked across Fort Holloway Airfield, his face red veins bulging in his neck. 26 years old MIT graduate, top of his class, and he couldn't start a 50-year-old helicopter. Behind him, a thin black man in his 70s stood perfectly still. Brown cap pulled low, bright orange polo shirt almost glowing in the afternoon sun, light brown khakis dusty from the walk across the tarmac. Nobody saw him yet. Nobody knew his name.
Sergeant Brooks,
but in exactly 17 minutes, this forgotten man would make every single person on that airfield question everything they thought they knew about respect, about history, and about what it really means to serve. Before we begin, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will restore your faith in the heroes we've forgotten. The heat was unbearable. Kyle Kramer stared at his laptop screen for the 19th time, watching the same green text mock him. All systems normal. Then why won't you start? He screamed at the Huey helicopter, his voice bouncing off the metal bird like an accusation. The UH-1 Huey, nicknamed Patriot Bell, sat on the tarmac like a corpse. Olive green paint faded to a sickly yellow-brown. Rotor blades still, silent. The aircraft had been pulled from a museum for a special Veterans Day demonstration flight, a photo opportunity for the base commander, a chance to honor the past. Instead, it had become Kyle's nightmare. "Step back, Kramer," Lieutenant Marcus Wells barked, adjusting his aviator sunglasses. Wells was 32, broad-shouldered, with the kind of jaw that looked good in recruitment posters. "Let Davidson take a crack at it." Sergeant Jennifer Davidson, 29, former Boeing contractor, dropped to her knees beside the engine cowling. She'd diagnosed turbine failures on Chinook's rewired Blackhawks in sandstorms. This antique shouldn't be a problem. She pulled the cowling open. "Fuel pumps connected," she muttered. "Ignition sequence is clean. Battery voltage is perfect. Hydraulics are—" "We know all that," Kyle snapped. "The diagnostics say it's fine." "Then the diagnostics are wrong," Davidson shot back. Lieutenant Wells checked his watch. "We've got 2 hours until the ceremony. The base commander has a senator flying in. The press is setting up. And we've got a dead bird that's supposed to be the centerpiece of the whole damn event." Airman Tommy Peterson, the youngest of the crew at 23, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sir, maybe we should call who, Peterson, the helicopter whisperer?" Wells's sarcasm was sharp. "This thing is 53 years old. It probably wants to die." Kyle kicked the landing skid. The hollow clang echoed across the flight line. "Vintage systems, vintage problems," he muttered. "We should have never pulled this thing out of retirement." That's when the old man spoke. "You ever think maybe she just needs someone who remembers how to talk to her?" Every head turned. Elijah Brooks stood 15 feet away just outside the yellow safety line, 5'7", maybe 140 pounds. Dark brown skin weathered like old leather. Hair beneath the brown cap was tight curls gone silver white. His nose was narrow, high-bridged, prominent. The bright orange polo shirt hung loose on his small frame sleeves rolled to the elbows. Light brown khakis, creased but clean. In his right hand he carried a worn leather pouch. Lieutenant Wells stepped forward. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I'm going to need you to step back behind the General Michelson sent for me." The words landed like a grenade. Wells blinked. "Excuse me, General Michelson called me this morning, said you had a bird that wouldn't wake up." Elijah's voice was quiet, textured with age, but carried the kind of certainty that didn't need volume. "Said it was Patriot Bell." Kyle laughed, actually laughed. "The general called you." "That's what I said." "To do what exactly? Pray over it." Elijah didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at Kyle with eyes that had seen things Kyle couldn't imagine. "To listen to her." Davidson stood up, wiping grease from her hands. "Listen to what? It's a machine. Machines don't talk." "Then you ain't been listening long enough." Wells pulled his phone from his pocket, stepping away to make a call. The rest of the crew exchanged glances, some amused, some annoyed. Peterson, just curious. Kyle crossed his arms. Look, old-timer, I appreciate whatever service you did back in the day, but this is advanced avionics, computerized diagnostics, integrated systems. It's not some lawnmower you can fix with duct tape. Elijah set his leather pouch on the ground gently, like it contained something sacred. You check the manual override. There is no manual override on the fuel system, Kyle said flatly. It's electronically controlled. On the new ones, maybe. This is the new system. It was retrofitted in 1989. Elijah tilted his head slightly. You open panel C7. Kyle's confidence flickered. What's panel C7? Small access door. Port side, right below where the crew chief used to sit during hot extractions. Davidson frowned. I don't remember seeing that in the manual. 'Cause it ain't in the manual. They stopped documenting field modifications after 73, but the modifications are still there. Kyle opened his laptop, scrolling frantically through the digital schematics. There's no panel C7 listed anywhere in the... Step aside, son. Something in Elijah's voice made Kyle step aside. The old man moved slowly, but with purpose, each step deliberate. He ran his hand along the helicopter's fuselage like a man touching the face of someone he once loved. His fingers traced panel lines, rivets, patches where shrapnel had once torn through. He stopped at a spot Kyle had walked past 20 times. Here. Elijah's fingers found a seam in the metal, barely visible beneath old paint and grime. He pressed two specific spots, click, click, and a small panel popped open. Kyle's mouth fell open. Inside was a tiny mechanical lever and a corroded bypass valve nobody had touched in decades. What the hell is that? Davidson breathed. Elijah reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a wrench, curved, hand-forged, the metal worn smooth from years of use. It looked like it belonged in a museum or a war. This, Elijah said quietly, is how we kept birds flying when the electronics got shot to hell. Manual fuel bypass. Lets you route fuel directly to the combustion chamber if the pump control fails. Kyle stared at the wrench, then at the old man. You installed that? Not just me. But yeah, I was there. Lieutenant Wells' returned phone still pressed to his ear, his face pale. Sir, I just spoke to the general's aide. They confirmed you were called in. I apologize for the... Don't apologize to me, Elijah said softly. Apologize to her. He nodded at the helicopter. She's been trying to tell you what's wrong all morning. You just weren't listening. Kyle felt something twist in his chest. Shame, curiosity, something else he couldn't name. What's your name? Peterson asked suddenly. Elijah looked at the young airman, seeing something in his face that reminded him of himself 50 years ago. Elijah Brooks. You serve in Vietnam, Mr. Brooks. I did. What unit? Elijah's eyes went distant for just a moment, seeing jungle canopy and tracer fire and faces of men who never made it home. 1st Cavalry Division, Ashau Valley, 67 to 69. Peterson's eyes widened. Ashau, that's where some of the heaviest fighting... It was heavy, Elijah said simply. It was very heavy. Kyle cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Okay, so you found a hidden panel. That still doesn't explain why the primary fuel system failed. Elijah knelt slowly, his knees creaking with age. He examined the bypass valve with a small flashlight pulled from his pocket. Your primary didn't fail. It got confused. Confused? It's a computer. Exactly. Elijah pointed with one finger at a sensor wire near the valve. See that? That's a ground strap from the original mechanical system. When they retrofitted the electronic pump, they left the old sensors in place but disconnected them. Except this one. He tapped the wire gently. This one's still connected, still sending signals, but it's corroded, so it's sending bad signals. Your computer's getting two different readings and can't decide which one's real. Davidson leaned in. So it's defaulting to safety mode. And safety mode means no fuel flow. Kyle finished, the realization hitting him. The system thinks there's a leak, so it shuts everything down. Elijah nodded. Smart system. Keeps you from starting a fire. but it don't know the sensor's lying. Lieutenant Wells stepped closer. Can you fix it? Elijah was already working, his hands moving with surprising steadiness despite his age. He used the curved wrench to gently disconnect the corroded sensor, then bypassed it with a small jumper wire he pulled from his pouch. This'll work temporary, for your demonstration, but you'll need to replace that sensor cluster before you fly her regular. Kyle watched in silence, his earlier arrogance crumbling with every precise movement the old man made. Where did you learn all this? Davidson asked, her voice genuinely respectful now. Elijah didn't look up from his work. When you're getting shot at, and the only way out is a helicopter that's bleeding fuel and taking fire, you learn real quick how to make things work. We didn't have computers. We didn't have diagnostic tools. We had wrenches and wire and prayer. He finished the bypass and slowly stood, joints protesting. Try her now. Kyle hesitated, then moved to the cockpit. He went through the startup sequence, hands actually trembling slightly. Master power on. Fuel pump prime. Ignition engage. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the turbine coughed, sputtered, caught. The rotor blades began to turn slowly at first, then faster, the familiar whoop, 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 building to a roar. The whole helicopter shook, came alive, 53 years of history waking up in one glorious moment. The crew erupted in cheers. Peterson was grinning ear to ear. Davidson actually hugged Kyle, who was too stunned to resist. Wells pulled off his sunglasses, staring at the running helicopter like he was seeing a ghost, and Elijah Brooks stood quietly to the side, watching Patriot Bell run a small, sad smile on his weathered face. She sounds good, he said to no one in particular. Real good. Kyle climbed down from the cockpit, his swagger completely gone. He approached Elijah slowly. I don't know what to say. Don't need to say nothing. No, I do. Kyle extended his hand. Thank you. And I'm sorry for how I talked to you. Elijah looked at the young man's hand for a moment, then shook it. You didn't know. That's all right. But I should have listened. Should have respected. You're young. Young people think new is always better. But sometimes old just means tested, proven. Elijah nodded toward the helicopter. She's been to hell and back, literally. She's earned her rest, but she'll still fly if you ask her right. Lieutenant Wells approached, his posture different. Now more careful, more humble. Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. I was disrespectful. I should have. You were doing your job. Keeping unauthorized personnel away from the aircraft. That's good discipline. Elijah picked up his leather pouch. But next time the general tells you he's sending someone, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Elijah turned to leave, moving toward the gate with that same slow, deliberate walk. Wait, Peterson called out. Mr. Brooks, can I ask you something? Elijah paused. Did you really fly in a show? I didn't fly. I fixed the birds that flew, kept them running when they shouldn't have been able to run. Crew chief. He tapped his chest where his heart was. You take care of your bird, she'll take care of you. Can you tell us about it sometime? About what it was like. Elijah studied the young airman's eager face, and something softened in his eyes. Maybe someday. But right now you've got a demonstration to prep for. General's going to want that bird looking sharp. As he walked away, Davidson turned to Kyle. You know what I just realized? We never even thanked him properly. We didn't get his number, his address, nothing. Kyle watched the old man disappear through the gate, the bright orange polo shirt fading into the distance. I have a feeling, he said quietly. That's exactly how he wanted it. But Kyle was wrong, because in 17 minutes, 3 black SUVs were going to screech onto that airfield, and everything everyone thought they knew about Elijah Brooks was about to shatter like glass. 17 minutes later, the crew was running through the pre-flight checklist when Peterson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. Airman Peterson. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's correct. Wait, what? His face went white. Kyle looked up from his clipboard. What's wrong? Peterson lowered his phone, staring at nothing. That was the general's aide. He wants to know why we let Mr. Brooks leave. We didn't let him leave. The general's on his way here, right now. and he's pissed. Lieutenant Wells' stomach dropped. Why would the general... He didn't get to finish. 3 black SUVs, military police lights flashing, tore through the main gate and raced across the tarmac, tires screaming. They skidded to a stop 30 feet from Patriot Bell doors flying open. General Marcus Michelson emerged from the center vehicle. 3 stars glinted on his shoulders, chest full of ribbons, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart with 2 clusters. He was 68 years old, iron gray hair, face carved from granite and fury. Behind him came his aide, a full colonel, and 2 MPs. Lieutenant Wells snapped to attention, his voice cracking slightly. "General, on deck." The entire crew froze, saluting. Michelson didn't return the salute. He strode forward, eyes blazing, looking at each face like he was memorizing it for a court-martial. "Where," he said, voice dangerously quiet, "is Elijah Brooks?" Wells swallowed hard. "Sir, he left approximately 15 minutes ago, through the main gate. He fixed the helicopter and then..." "You let him leave?" "Sir, we didn't know we were supposed to." "Get him back here, now." Peterson stepped forward. "Sir, we don't have his contact information. He didn't leave." Michelson spun on his aide. "Colonel Davis, I want MPs at every gate. I want him found in the next 10 minutes or I'm going to start ending careers. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." Davis pulled out his radio, barking orders. Kyle couldn't help himself. "General, sir, permission to speak." Michelson's eyes locked onto him. "Who are you?" "Technical Sergeant Kyle Kramer, sir. I was the lead tech on this repair. Sir, Mr. Brooks was incredibly helpful, but I don't understand why." "You don't understand." Michelson's voice could have frozen flames. "You don't understand who that man is. He said he was a crew chief, 1st Cav, a Shao Valley. Did he tell you his call sign?" Kyle blinked. "No, sir." "They called him Ghost." The name hung in the air like smoke. Davidson stepped forward. "Ghost, as in the ghost of a Shao, as in the man who kept more helicopters flying through more combat than any crew chief in the history of the Vietnam War. As in the man who was recommended for the Medal of Honor twice and turned it down twice because he said he was just doing his job." The crew stood in stunned silence. Wells found his voice. "Sir, we didn't know." He never said, of course he didn't say, because men like Elijah Brooks don't talk about what they did. They just do it and then fade into the background while people like you take credit for it. Michelson pointed at Patriot Bell, his hand shaking slightly. "You know what helicopter that really is? It's one of the museum pieces from..." "That's tail number 66-16835. In June of 1968, that bird took 17 rounds from a 51 cal, lost hydraulics, lost electronics, lost half the engine cowling. It was going down over enemy territory with 9 wounded on board." Michelson's voice dropped. Elijah Brooks, 24 years old, climbed out onto the skid during flight in the middle of a firefight and jury-rigged a hydraulic bypass using paracord and a piece of sheet metal. He kept that bird in the air long enough for the pilot to make it back across the river. Peterson's eyes were wide. Oh my God. 9 men lived because of him. 9 men who have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren walking around today because one skinny kid from South Carolina refused to let his bird quit. Kyle felt sick to his stomach. "Sir, I called him old-timer. I told him this was advanced and he wouldn't understand." Michelson looked at him with something between pity and disgust. "You told the ghost he wouldn't understand the man who invented half the field modifications you're still using today." Davidson spoke quietly. "The manual bypass, panel C7, he built that. He built a lot of things. Fixes that worked when nothing else would. Tricks that saved lives. And none of it got documented because he was just a crew chief. Just an enlisted man. Just a black kid from the South who nobody thought was worth listening to." The truth of it hit them all like a physical blow. Michelson's radio crackled. "General, we've located Mr. Brooks. He's at the bus stop outside the North Gate. Get him, politely, and bring him back here." "Yes, sir." The general turned back to his crew, and now there was something else in his eyes, not just anger, but disappointment. "Listen to me, all of you. There's a generation of men and women who built the military you inherited. They did it with less technology, less support, less recognition, and less respect. They were mechanics and cooks and supply clerks and medics. And they made it work because failure meant people died. He pointed at each of them in turn. You have computers. You have diagnostics. You have manuals and training and support systems. And you couldn't start one helicopter that a 75-year-old man fixed in 8 minutes with a homemade wrench. Kyle wanted to disappear into the tarmac. When he gets back here, Michelson continued, you will treat him with the respect he's earned. You will listen when he speaks. You will learn from him. And you will thank him. Are we clear? Yes, sir, they responded in unison. 10 minutes later, an MP vehicle rolled up. The door opened. Elijah Brooks stepped out, looking confused and slightly worried. Sir, they said you wanted to see me. Is everything all right with the bird? General Michelson walked forward and saluted. Elijah's eyes widened. General, you don't need to. Sergeant Brooks, it is an honor to have you on my airfield. Slowly, hesitantly, Elijah returned the salute. The general dropped his hand, then extended it for a shake. I apologize that my people didn't recognize you. That won't happen again. General, I wasn't looking for recognition. You called, I came. That's all. That's not all, and you know it. Michelson turned to the crew. Everyone here is going to hear your story, the real story. Elijah's face tightened. Sir, that was a long time ago. I'm just here to help with the helicopter. And you did. But these young people need to understand what they're inheriting, what it cost, who paid the price. For a long moment, Elijah just stood there, the afternoon sun making his orange polo shirt glow like a beacon. His weathered hands hung at his sides, that leather pouch still clutched in his right hand. Finally, he looked at the faces around him. Kyle Davidson, Wells Peterson. Young faces, eager faces, faces that had no idea what war really looked like. All right, he said softly, but not out here in the heat. And somebody better get me some water. They moved into the hangar out of the sun. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone else got bottles of cold water from a cooler. The general sat down next to Elijah, and the crew gathered in a semicircle. And Elijah Brooks began to talk. First time I saw a Huey up close, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever laid eyes on. The words came slowly at first, like water from a long dry well. But as he spoke, something changed in the hangar. The air itself seemed to shift, to thicken with memory. And for the next 2 hours, no one moved. No one checked their phones. No one interrupted. They just listened to a ghost tell them what it really meant to serve. Elijah's voice filled the hangar like smoke from an old fire, slow and careful, each word chosen with the precision of a man who'd learned that some stories could hurt if you told them wrong. First time I saw a Huey up close, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever laid eyes on. This was Fort Polk, Louisiana, 1966. I was 19 years old, fresh out of basic, skinny as a rail, and scared to death I'd wash out of crew chief training. He took a sip of water. His hand steady now, more steady than it had been in years. My instructor was a white sergeant from Alabama named Dale Hutchins. First day he looked at me like I was dirt on his boot. Didn't say nothing to me for 3 weeks except wrong and do it again and you'll never make it, boy. Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But then one night we had a bird come in hot from a training exercise. Hydraulic failure. Pilot managed to set her down, but she was leaking fluid everywhere, burning oil the whole 9 yards. Hutchins was off duty, so it was just me and 2 other trainees trying to figure out what to do. We had the manual open, trying to follow the procedures, but nothing was making sense. The fluid was coming from somewhere the manual said it couldn't come from. Elijah's eyes went distant, seeing something 40 years past. I got down under that bird, got my face right up in the machinery, and I listened. My daddy back in South Carolina, he fixed tractors. Old man never had more than a 3rd grade education, but he could hear what was wrong with an engine just by listening to it idle. So I listened. And I heard this little hiss, real faint, coming from a junction nobody had checked because it wasn't on the checklist. Peterson leaned forward. What was it? Cracked pressure seal. tiny crack barely visible, but under load, it would spread and dump all your hydraulic pressure in about 90 seconds. I patched it with thread seal and a hose clamp. Wasn't pretty, but it held. Bird flew the next morning. Elijah smiled, but there was no joy in it. Hutchins heard about it. Came and found me in the barracks that night. I thought for sure he was going to write me up for improvising for not following the book. Instead, he sat down on my bunk and said, "Brooks, I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew you. You've got something I can't teach. You've got the gift." "What gift?" Davidson asked. "The gift of listening, of knowing that machines aren't just metal and fuel. They're systems, living systems, and if you pay attention, they'll tell you what's wrong." General Michelson nodded slowly. "That's what made you different. That's what made you Ghost." I didn't get that name until later. Until... Elijah's voice trailed off and something dark crossed his face. Until a show. The hangar went completely silent. We shipped out in February of '67. 1st Cavalry Division attached to the 229th Aviation Battalion. I was crew chief on a Huey they called Sweet Caroline back then. Pilot was a kid from Oregon named Lieutenant Danny Reeves. Co-pilot was older 30-something former crop duster named CW2 Bill Morrison. Door gunner was a Mexican kid from Texas, Jose Gutierrez. Barely 18, looked about 15. Elijah's hands tightened around the water bottle. We flew resupply missions mostly. Ammo, food, water mail. Sometimes we'd extract wounded. Sometimes we'd insert troops. A Shao Valley was... it was hell on earth. Steep mountains, thick jungle enemy everywhere. You couldn't see them, but they could see you. Every landing zone was hot. Every mission was a roll of the dice. Kyle wanted to ask what hot meant, but something told him to stay quiet. March 15th, 1967. That was the first time Sweet Caroline took serious damage. We were extracting a recon team that had been compromised. 6 men surrounded, taking fire from 3 sides. Reeves dropped us into an LZ that wasn't really an LZ, just a small clearing, maybe 50 feet across trees, all around enemy in the trees. Elijah's voice had changed, now flatter, more mechanical, like he was reading a report. We took fire coming in. I heard rounds hitting the fuselage. You always hear them, that metallic thunk, thunk, thunk. Gutierrez was firing the M60 long bursts, trying to suppress the tree line. We touched down and the recon team came running, but one of them was hit, couldn't run, had to be carried. Morrison was screaming at them to hurry. Rounds were hitting everywhere. I saw tracers go right past my head, so close I felt the heat. Peterson's mouth was dry. "How did you stay calm?" "I didn't. I was terrified. But terror doesn't mean you stop working. You just work scared." Elijah closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, everyone in that hangar could see it happening. The last man was 10 feet away when I heard something change in the engine sound. Just a slight miss, a little hesitation. I looked at the temperature gauge and it was climbing fast. Too fast. We'd taken a round through the oil cooler. I knew we had maybe 2 minutes before that engine seized completely. "Did you tell the pilot?" Wells asked. "Didn't have time." The last man dove through the door, Reeves pulled collective, and we started to lift. That's when the engine started screaming. Temperature was redlining. I could smell burning oil. I yanked open the engine access panel. We were maybe 20 feet off the ground, now taking fire. Gutierrez still shooting the wounded man, bleeding all over the floor, and I saw the problem. The oil line had been severed. Not completely, but enough. We were losing oil pressure fast. Davidson knew enough to understand what that meant. Without oil pressure, the engine destroys itself. Bearing seize. Turbine blades shatter. You fall out of the sky like a stone. "What did you do?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper. Elijah opened his eyes, and there was something in them that made everyone in that hangar finally understand what it meant to be Ghost. I grabbed a roll of speed tape from my kit, that's super strong adhesive tape, like duct tape but industrial grade, and I climbed out onto the skid. The room erupted. "You, what?" While it was flying, taking fire. Elijah held up a hand, and they fell silent. We were maybe 40 feet up by then. Trees on both sides. tracer rounds coming up from the jungle. Wind from the rotor wash was trying to tear me off. I wrapped one arm around the strut, held the tape in my teeth, and reached for that oil line. I couldn't see it clearly. Too much smoke, too much vibration, so I just felt for it. Found the split, wrapped it with tape. 3 wraps, 4-5. My fingers were burning from the heat. I could hear Morrison in the intercom yelling that we were losing altitude, that we weren't going to make it out of the valley. No one breathed. I used the whole roll, got back inside, told Reeves we'd bought maybe 10 more minutes if we were lucky. He nodded and just kept flying. We made it back to base with the engine temperature gauge so far past red they had to replace the gauge because it broke. General Michelson spoke quietly. "That was your first Purple Heart." Elijah looked at him sharply. "I never filed for a Purple Heart. Reeves put you in for one. He put you in for the Distinguished Flying Cross too. Both got downgraded to an Army Commendation Medal because you were enlisted and black and the paperwork got lost." The bitterness in Michelson's voice was unmistakable. Elijah shrugged, but his jaw was tight. "Awards don't keep birds flying. Work keeps birds flying." "How many missions did you fly?" Peterson asked. "Lost count after 400. We flew every day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times if it was bad and they needed birds in the air. You'd land, refuel, rearm check the bird over and go back up. I got so I could do a full mechanical inspection in 15 minutes. You learn to see what matters and ignore what doesn't." "Did Sweet Caroline make it?" Davidson asked. Elijah's face hardened. "No, she didn't." The word "didn't" hung in the air like a death sentence. July 2nd, 1967. We were tasked with extracting a platoon that had been ambushed on Hill 937. Horrible place. Steep slopes, triple canopy jungle. Enemy had the high ground. We were the 4th bird in. The first 3 had all taken damage but made it out. We thought we'd be lucky too. He paused, took another drink of water, and Kyle realized the old man's hand was shaking now. "We came in low and fast, Reeves flying like his hair was on fire, Morrison calling out obstacles, Gutierrez shooting anything that moved. We touched down in this tiny LZ, and that's when everything went wrong. Someone in the platoon had stepped on a mine or tripped a booby trap. I never found out which, but there was an explosion maybe 30 feet away. Shrapnel tore through Sweet Caroline like she was made of tissue paper." Elijah's voice had gone cold, mechanical again. "Reeves took shrapnel in the leg and shoulder. Morrison took it in the arm. Gutierrez was killed instantly. Round went through the door and hit him in the chest. He was dead before he hit the floor. And Sweet Caroline, she was dying too." I could hear fluids leaking, hydraulics failing, electronics sparking. The radios were screaming with voices, other pilots yelling, men on the ground screaming for help, command, asking for status. And all I could think was that we were all about to die on that hill. Lieutenant Wells felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How did you get out?" "Reeves, even with shrapnel in him, got us airborne. Don't ask me how. The man was bleeding, probably in shock, but he pulled collective and we lifted. Barely. We were maybe 10 feet off the ground when the hydraulics failed completely. The controls went stiff. Reeves was fighting the cyclic with both hands. Morrison was trying to help even though his arm was mangled, and I was in the back, trying to manually pump the hydraulic system with the emergency backup pump." "Did it work?" Kyle asked, though he already knew the answer. "Barely. We got maybe half pressure, enough for Reeves to maintain some control. We limped out of that valley doing maybe 40 knots, losing altitude the whole way, and behind us I could hear the LZ getting overrun. The men we'd tried to extract, they didn't make it. None of them made it. The hangar was so quiet they could hear the wind outside. We crashed about 2 miles from base. Reeves put us down in a rice paddy, hard landing. Broke the skids, cracked the fuselage, but we were alive. Reeves and Morrison both got evacuated to Japan. I stayed. They gave me a new bird the next day." "The next day?" Davidson couldn't believe it. "You didn't even get time to... There was a war on. They needed crew chiefs. You didn't sit around processing your feelings. You got back in the bird." Peterson's voice was small. "What happened to Gutierrez?" "They sent him home in a box. His mother wrote me a letter 6 months later. She wanted to know if her son had suffered. I lied to her, told her it was instant, that he didn't feel anything. I don't know if that was true, but it's what she needed to hear. Elijah wiped his eyes quickly, pretending it was just sweat. The new bird was tail number 6616835. She didn't have a name yet, so I called her Patriot Belle. Seemed right. She'd ring out across those valleys like she was announcing freedom, or death, depending on which side you were on. "That's the bird outside," Kyle said softly. "That's the one we couldn't start." "That's her, my bird. Flew her for the next 18 months. Through every kind of hell you can imagine, and some you can't." General Michelson leaned forward. "Tell them about Firebase Ripcord." Elijah's whole body tensed. "General, I don't think—" "They need to know. They need to understand what you did." For a long moment, Elijah just sat there staring at his hands. Hands that had been young and strong once. Hands that had held wrenches and rifles and dying men. "Firebase Ripcord," he finally said, "was where I became Ghost." The name settled over them like a shroud. June 1968. The firebase was under siege, surrounded by NVA regulars taking mortar fire rocket fire ground assaults. They needed resupply ammo, medical supplies, food, water, but the LZ was under constant fire. They called it flying into hell's mailbox. Birds were getting shot down left and right. Command was asking for volunteers. "You volunteered," Peterson said. "Whole crew did. New pilot kid named Lieutenant Jack Hastings. Fresh out of flight school, 22 years old, scared but trying not to show it. Co-pilot was a warrant officer named DeMarco, tough little Italian guy from Boston. Door gunner was a farm kid from Iowa named Yates. Good kid, strong. We loaded up with ammo crates and flew out." Elijah's hands were shaking badly now, and he pressed them against his knees to still them. The approach to Ripcord was a narrow valley with high ridges on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain. The enemy knew exactly where we had to fly, and they had guns waiting. We could see tracers coming up before we even entered the valley. Green tracers. That's how you knew it was enemy fire. They used green or white tracers, we used red. It looked like something from a science fiction movie, just streams of green light arcing up out of the jungle. "How did you survive that?" Wells asked. "Speed and luck. Hastings flew nap of the earth low and fast, using the terrain for cover when he could. But you can't avoid fire when they've got guns on both ridges. We took hits coming in. I counted 17 separate impacts. One round came through the floor right between my feet. Another took out the side window. Another hit the transmission housing but didn't penetrate. We were flying a bird that was being torn apart around us." Elijah's voice started to crack. "We made it to the LZ. Troops were waiting. We started unloading. The crew inside was throwing crates out. I was directing. Yates was providing cover fire when a mortar round hit maybe 20 feet away. The concussion knocked me flat. My ears were ringing. Couldn't hear anything except this high-pitched whine. I looked up and saw Yates slumped over his gun. Saw blood. Saw DeMarco waving at me, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. And then I realized the bird was starting to lift. They were leaving." Kyle's eyes went wide. "With you still outside?" Hastings couldn't wait. Another mortar round was incoming. He had to go or everyone would die. It was the right call, but it meant I was on the ground at Firebase Ripcord with no way out. The horror of it settled over the crew like a weight. I ran for the bunker. Mortar rounds were landing everywhere. I made it inside and there were maybe 30 men in there, most of them wounded, all of them exhausted. A captain, I never learned his name, looked at me and said, "You the crew chief from the Huey?" I nodded. He said, "We've got a bird on the other side of the firebase that took an RPG hit yesterday. Dead. You think you can fix it?" I said, "Let me see it." "Wait," Davidson interrupted. "They had a helicopter there at the firebase. Supply bird that got hit during landing the day before. Pilot and co-pilot were both wounded in the crash, got evacuated on another bird, but the Huey was too damaged to fly out, so they left it. The captain was hoping I could get it running because they had critical casualties who needed immediate evac. Without that bird, those men were going to die." Elijah took a shaky breath. "So I went out there, in the middle of the mortar attack, ran across the firebase with rounds landing all around me. Found the bird and she was in bad shape. RPG had hit the tail boom, taken out the tail rotor control cables. Half the hydraulics were destroyed. The engine looked okay, but the electrical system was fried. No radios, no instruments, nothing. That's impossible to fix, Kyle said. You'd need a maintenance depot, replacement parts, specialized tools. I had a wrench, a roll of wire, and a screwdriver, and I had about 4 hours before nightfall because if we didn't get those wounded out before dark, the enemy would overrun the fire base and everyone would die. No one spoke. Elijah's voice was barely above a whisper now. I worked on that bird like I'd never worked before. Bypassed the electrical system entirely, went manual on everything I could. Rigged the tail rotor controls using paracord and cargo straps. Used wire to create a basic ignition system. Pulled circuit boards from other damaged equipment around the firebase to get the engine starter working. I worked through mortar fire, through sniper fire, through exhaustion and terror and pain. Did you get it running? Peterson's voice was full of awe and dread. I got it running. Took me 6 hours. By then it was getting dark. The captain found a helicopter pilot among the infantry, a guy who'd been there training ground troops but was rated on Hueys. His name was Lieutenant Ross. He looked at the bird I'd put together and said, "This thing will fly." I said, "I don't know, but it's the only chance those men have." Elijah's eyes were wet now, tears cutting tracks down his weathered face. We loaded 14 wounded men into that bird, packed them in like sardines. Ross and I were the only crew, no co-pilot, no gunner, just us, and we took off. At night, in a jury-rigged helicopter, flying out of a firebase under siege. It was the stupidest, craziest, most desperate thing I've ever done. "Did you make it?" Wells asked, though he knew they must have, or Elijah wouldn't be sitting here. Barely. The tail rotor controls kept slipping. I had to hold them in place with my hands the entire flight, adjusting tension manually. We took fire going out. We had no radios, so we couldn't call for help or warn anyone we were coming. We flew 23 miles in complete darkness, with a helicopter that shouldn't have been able to fly, and we landed at the field hospital with maybe 30 seconds of fuel left. Elijah wiped his face with the back of his hand. 14 men lived. 14 men who would have died if that bird hadn't flown. And when we landed, when the medical staff saw what we'd done, they just stared. One of the doctors said, "That helicopter's a ghost. It shouldn't be flying." And Ross pointed at me and said, "He's the ghost. He brought the dead back to life." The nickname made sense now. Horrible, perfect sense. After that, Elijah continued, voice hoarse. The name stuck. Ghost. The crew chief who could fix anything, who could keep birds flying when they should have been dead. Word spread. Units started requesting me specifically. If you had a bird that was damaged, that was dying, you called for Ghost, and I'd come, and I'd make it fly. General Michelson spoke quietly, his own voice thick. You saved more lives than we'll ever be able to count. You kept the cavalry flying when it should have been grounded. You're a legend. I'm not a legend. I'm just an old man who knew how to listen to machines. No, Kyle said, suddenly standing up. His voice was shaking. No, sir. You're a hero. And I'm ashamed of how I treated you today. I'm ashamed that I thought I knew better. I'm ashamed that I dismissed you because you're old and I'm young and I have a degree and you don't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Elijah looked at the young technician for a long moment, then slowly stood, his joints creaking. He walked over and put a hand on Kyle's shoulder. You didn't know. How could you? Nobody talks about men like me. We're not in the history books. We don't get monuments. We just fade away. But that's okay. That was never why we did it. Why did you do it? Peterson asked. Elijah turned to face them all. This small black man in his orange polo shirt and brown cap, his eyes holding depths of experience none of them could fathom. Because the man next to you doesn't care what color your skin is when bullets are flying. Because when you're bleeding and scared and waiting for a helicopter to pull you out of hell, you don't care who the crew chief is, as long as he can keep that bird in the air. Because war strips away all the bullshit, and all you have left is this: can you do the job? Will you stand when others run? Will you give everything you have so someone else can live? His voice grew stronger. I did it because those were my brothers. White, black, brown didn't matter. We all bled the same red. We all wanted to go home the same amount. And if I could fix one more bird fly, one more mission, save one more life, then all the fear and pain and nightmares were worth it. The hangar was completely silent, except for the sound of grown men trying not to cry. Finally, Lieutenant Wells stood and came to attention. Sergeant Brooks, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. And thank you for coming back today to help us. We don't deserve your time, but we're grateful for it. Elijah nodded slowly. You're welcome. But you do deserve it. You're the ones carrying it forward now. You're the ones who have to keep these birds flying, keep these missions running, keep your people safe. That's the honor and the burden you inherit. General Michelson checked his watch. We have 45 minutes until the demonstration. Sergeant Brooks, would you do us the honor of being present for the ceremony? I'd like to introduce you to the crowd. Let people know who you are and what you've done. Elijah's face showed real fear for the first time. General, I appreciate that, but I don't do crowds. I don't do speeches. I'm just here to help with the bird. The bird is running because of you. The people who come today need to know that. No, sir, they really don't. Let them think their smart young technicians fixed it. Let them believe the system works. That's better for everyone. Michelson started to argue, but something in Elijah's eyes stopped him. This wasn't modesty. This was something deeper, a need to remain invisible, to stay in the shadows where he'd lived his whole life. All right, the general finally said. But you'll stay for the ceremony as my guest. I'll stay, but I'll stay quiet. They moved back outside into the brutal afternoon heat. The ceremony area was taking shape: bleachers for VIPs, a speaking podium, a crowd of soldiers and veterans and families gathering. Patriot Belle sat gleaming on the tarmac, her rotors still waiting. Kyle approached Elijah nervously. Sir, can I ask you something? Go ahead. That wrench you used, the curved one in your pouch, is that the same one from Vietnam? Elijah reached into the leather pouch and pulled it out, holding it up to the light. The metal was worn smooth dark with age and oil and use. Made it myself in 1967. Bent a standard box wrench over a fire, shaped it to fit into spaces it wasn't meant to fit. Used it on maybe 1,000 repairs. It's been with me longer than anything else I own. Why do you still carry it? Elijah looked at the wrench, really looked at it, and something moved across his face. Grief, memory, stubborn pride. Because forgetting is easy, and I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget the men who didn't come home. I don't want to forget the birds that fell. I don't want to forget what it cost. He slipped the wrench back into the pouch. This wrench is my memory. As long as I carry it, those men aren't forgotten. That war isn't forgotten. What we did isn't forgotten. Kyle felt something break open in his chest. Something he didn't have words for. Will you teach me? The question came out before he could stop it. Not just about helicopters, but about listening. About understanding, about... He struggled to find the words. About doing this right. Elijah studied the young man's face, seeing sincerity there, seeing humility that hadn't been there 3 hours ago. Yeah, he said finally. I think I can do that. And for the first time that day, Elijah Brooks smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his weathered face into something almost young. But that moment of peace wouldn't last, because in exactly 8 minutes, a VIP guest was going to collapse during the ceremony, and the only helicopter available to evacuate him would be Patriot Belle, and the only crew chief who could ensure she stayed in the air for the emergency flight would be a 75-year-old black man who hadn't flown a combat mission in 56 years. The ceremony began exactly on schedule at 1400 hours, and Elijah stood at the back of the crowd trying to be invisible. The bright orange polo shirt made that impossible, but he stayed behind the bleachers anyway, watching from the shadows while General Michelson stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow veterans, the general's voice boomed across the tarmac. Today we honor the aircraft, and the men who flew them during one of the most challenging conflicts in American history. Elijah barely listened to the speech. He'd heard versions of it 100 times over the years. The words always sounded good, always sounded respectful, but they never quite captured what it had really been like. How could they? How do you explain the smell of burning fuel and blood? How do you describe the sound a helicopter makes when it's dying? How do you tell people who've never been shot at what fear really feels like? Kyle stood near the front with the rest of the technical crew, but he kept glancing back toward where Elijah stood. The old man caught his eye once and nodded. The young technician nodded back, something unspoken passing between them. General Michelson was introducing the VIP guests now. A state senator, a retired 3-star general, a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd written a book, a congressman who served on the Armed Services Committee. They all stood and waved while the crowd applauded politely. Then Michelson gestured toward Patriot Bell, her rotors gleaming in the afternoon sun. This aircraft, tail number 66-16835, flew over 300 combat missions in Vietnam. She carried troops into battle, evacuated wounded, delivered supplies to besieged fire bases, and saved countless lives. Today she represents not just a piece of machinery, but the spirit of service and sacrifice that defined a generation. More applause. Elijah felt his throat tighten. If they only knew how close that bird had come to never flying again. If they only knew she was running right now because of a bypass valve nobody remembered and a wrench that shouldn't exist. We'll now have a brief flyover demonstration, the general continued. Captain Rodriguez will take Patriot Bell up for a ceremonial flight showing us what these magnificent aircraft were capable of. The crowd shifted, excited murmurs spreading. People pulled out phones to record. Kids pressed against the safety barriers, wanting to see the old helicopter fly. That's when Elijah noticed something wrong. One of the VIP guests, the retired 3-star general, was gripping the armrest of his chair too hard. His face had gone gray. Sweat was pouring down his temples despite the shade from the canopy above the VIP section. Elijah started moving forward without thinking, his legs carrying him through the crowd. The retired general, his name tag read, Harrigan, suddenly stood up, swaying. His wife grabbed his arm, her face panicked. John, what's wrong?" "I'm fine," Harrigan said, but his voice was slurred. "Just need some air." He took one step and collapsed. The crowd erupted in chaos. People screamed. The senator jumped back. 2 military police officers rushed forward. General Michelson was already on his radio calling for medical assistance. Elijah reached the VIP section just as a medic dropped to his knees beside Harrigan. The old general was conscious, but barely, his breathing rapid and shallow, his skin cold and clammy. "Cardiac event," the medic said urgently into his radio. "I need an ambulance at the ceremony grounds now." Patient is male, approximately 70 years old, presenting with chest pain, shortness of breath, and altered mental status. Michelson was beside them instantly. "How long for the ambulance?" "Sir, we're on base. Nearest civilian hospital is 40 minutes away. Base clinic doesn't have cardiac capabilities. He needs a trauma center immediately." Harrigan's wife was crying. Please help him. He had bypass surgery 2 years ago, his heart." "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can," the medic said, but Elijah could hear the worry in his voice. 40 minutes might as well be 40 hours if the man was having a massive coronary. Lieutenant Wells appeared, his face pale. "Sir, what do you need?" "I need a medevac helicopter in the air 5 minutes ago," Michelson snapped. "Where's the nearest?" "Sir, all our active medevac birds are deployed on training exercises. They're 40 miles north at the range complex. Callback time would be at least 30 minutes plus flight time." Michelson's face went hard. "Then we use Patriot Bell." Wells blinked. "Sir, she's not certified for medical evacuations. She doesn't have the proper equipment she's not been through. She has rotors and she flies. That's all I need. Get Captain Rodriguez in the cockpit now." Wells ran. Kyle appeared at Elijah's side, breathing hard. "Mr. Brooks, they're going to fly the Huey for the medevac. Is she ready? Can she handle it?" Elijah was already moving toward the helicopter, his mind racing through every system, every connection, every potential failure point. The bird had run fine during the test, but that was ground operations. Flying was different. Flying put stress on every component. And if something failed mid-flight with a cardiac patient on board, "She'll fly," Elijah said. "But I need to do a pre-flight check, a real one, not the abbreviated version." "We don't have time," Wells shouted from the cockpit where Captain Rodriguez was already going through startup procedures. "General Harrigan's vitals are dropping. We need to be wheels up in 3 minutes or he won't make it." Elijah reached the helicopter and yanked open the engine access panel. His hands moved with speed that seemed impossible for a man his age, checking connections, testing pressure lines, verifying the manual bypass was secure. Oil pressure good, fuel flow good, hydraulics responding, transmission coupling solid. Davidson appeared with a checklist. "Mr. Brooks, what else do we need?" "Medical equipment. Do you have oxygen?" "In the base clinic. I'll get it." "Stretcher or spine board. AED if you've got one. Trauma kit." Davidson was already running. Peterson came up behind them. "Mr. Brooks, I pulled the maintenance logs. Last full service on this bird was 6 months ago at the museum. They did basic preservation but no operational testing. What if something fails?" Elijah looked at the young airman, and for just a moment, Peterson saw something terrifying in the old man's eyes, absolute certainty mixed with absolute fear. "Then I'll fix it in flight." You're going with them." "Damn right I am. This is my bird. If she's flying someone who's dying, I'm going to make sure she doesn't quit." Captain Rodriguez, a lean Puerto Rican woman with sharp eyes and 15 years of flight experience, leaned out of the cockpit. "You're the crew chief who got her running." "I am." "You ever fly crew in a Huey before?" "About 400 times. In worse conditions than this." Rodriguez studied him for exactly 2 seconds, then nodded. "Get in. We launch in 90 seconds. Elijah climbed into the crew compartment, his body remembering the motion, even though it had been over 50 years. The metal under his hands was familiar, almost comforting. He found the crew chief's harness and strapped in his fingers, working the buckles automatically. Kyle appeared at the door with the medical equipment. "Here, we've got oxygen, AED, trauma kit, IV supplies." "Good. Secure it all. Nothing loose. If we hit turbulence, I don't want equipment flying around." 2 medics carried General Harrigan on a stretcher, his wife running beside them. They loaded him into the helicopter with practiced efficiency, though their faces showed their fear. This wasn't a modern medevac bird with proper medical stations and monitoring equipment. This was a museum piece pressed into emergency service. Harrigan's wife tried to climb in after him. "Ma'am, I'm sorry we can't take civilians," Rodriguez said firmly. "Weight restrictions and safety regulations." "That's my husband," she screamed. "I'm not letting him go alone." Elijah looked at Rodriguez, something passing between them. "Let her come," he said quietly. "If he dies, she should be there." Rodriguez hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Get in, ma'am. Stay strapped in and stay out of the way." The woman climbed in, tears streaming down her face. One of the medics, a young sergeant named Garcia, climbed in after her. "I'm going too. He needs constant monitoring." General Michelson appeared at the door. "Brooks, you bring my friend back alive. That's an order." "I'll bring your bird back safe, General. The rest is up to God and the doctors." Michelson stepped back, and Rodriguez began the startup sequence. The turbine began to whine, building power. The rotors started turning slowly at first, then faster. Elijah felt the familiar vibration through the airframe, felt the bird wake up around him. He listened intently, hearing every sound, every variation, checking for anything wrong. "Rotor RPM coming up," Rodriguez called out. "Oil pressure good. Hydraulics good. All systems showing green." "She's ready," Elijah said into the crew intercom. "Take her up." Rodriguez pulled Collective and Patriot Bell lifted off the tarmac for the first time in years, rising into the hot afternoon air. The crowd below watched in stunned silence as the old warbird climbed her rotor wash, kicking up dust and debris. "Tower, this is Patriot Bell," Rodriguez said into the radio. "Emergency medevac flight requesting priority direct routing to County General Hospital." "Patriot Bell Tower. Roger, you are cleared for immediate departure. Maintain heading 270, altitude 1,000 feet. Be advised, County General is 41 miles at that heading. Flight time approximately 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Elijah looked at General Harrigan lying on the stretcher. The man's face was ashen. His breathing was labored. Garcia had an oxygen mask on him and was taking vitals, his expression grim. "How is he?" Elijah asked. "Not good. Blood pressure dropping. Heart rate erratic. I think he's having a major MI. If we don't get him to a cath lab soon." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mrs. Harrigan sobbed quietly, holding her husband's hand. "Please don't leave me, John. Please. We've got grandchildren coming next month. You promised you'd meet them. You promised." Elijah felt his chest tighten. How many times had he heard similar words? How many dying men had whispered to wives and mothers who weren't there? How many promises had been broken by bullets and shrapnel and random chance? The helicopter climbed to 1,000 feet and leveled off the landscape spreading below them. Rodriguez pushed the airspeed up the old Huey, responding beautifully. "She's flying like a dream," the pilot said, surprise in her voice. "Whatever you did to her, Mr. Brooks, she's running better than birds half her age." "She just needed someone to listen," Elijah replied, but he was only half paying attention. His focus was on the sounds, the vibrations, the subtle feedback that told him how every system was performing. Everything seemed good. Too good. And Elijah had learned long ago that when things seemed too good, that's when they went bad. They'd been in the air for 7 minutes when he heard it. A slight change in the engine tone, nothing dramatic, nothing the pilot would notice, but Elijah heard it, felt it in his bones. "Captain," he said calmly into the intercom, "we've got a problem." Rodriguez's voice tightened immediately. "What kind of problem?" "Temperature's climbing on the turbine. Not critical yet, but it's trending wrong. The gauge shows normal." "The gauge is wrong. I can hear it." For a moment there was silence on the intercom. Elijah knew what she was thinking. Trust her instruments, or trust an old man who claimed he could hear problems. "How sure are you?" Rodriguez asked. "Sure enough to tell you. We've got maybe 10 minutes before it becomes critical. Can we make the hospital in 10? Not at this speed. I'd need to push her harder." "Then push her, but understand that pushing increases the temperature problem. It's a race between getting there and the engine failing. And if the engine fails, we auto-rotate down and General Harrigan dies in a field somewhere." The brutal honesty hung in the air between them. "Auto-rotation," Rodriguez muttered. "Haven't done one of those in years, and never in an aircraft this old." "She'll handle it if she has to, but let's hope she doesn't have to." Rodriguez made her decision. "Tower, Patriot Bell requesting clearance to increase airspeed to maximum. Medical emergency." "Patriot Bell Tower. Cleared as requested. Be advised you're approaching the maximum safe speed for that airframe." "Copy that, Tower. Patriot Bell is going to redline. Out." Rodriguez pushed the cyclic forward and increased collective. Patriot Bell surged forward. Her airspeed, climbing past 80 knots, past 90, past 100. The old helicopter was screaming now, every rivet and weld stressed to their limits. Elijah felt the temperature continuing to climb. The engine was working too hard, burning too hot. The oil that had been marginal was now breaking down, losing viscosity, providing less protection to the spinning turbine blades. "How's our patient?" Rodriguez called back. Garcia looked up from where he was working on Harrigan, and his face said everything. "We're losing him. BP is critical. Heart rhythm is deteriorating. We need that hospital now." Mrs. Harrigan was praying, her lips moving silently, tears falling on her husband's still hand. Elijah closed his eyes for just a moment, and he was back in Vietnam. Back in that valley. Back in the bird with 14 wounded men and a jury-rigged helicopter that shouldn't fly. He remembered the fear, the desperate focus, the absolute certainty that failure meant death. He opened his eyes. "Captain, you need to push her harder. I'm already past safe limits. Safe limits are for peacetime. This man is dying. Push her harder." Rodriguez's jaw clenched, And Elijah saw her make the same decision he'd made 100 times before, the decision to risk everything for one more life. She pushed the airspeed to 110 knots. The helicopter was shaking now, the vibration making everything blur. Elijah could hear things starting to stress, could feel components working past their design specifications, and the temperature kept climbing. 8 minutes to hospital, Rodriguez said, her voice tight with concentration. Elijah did the math in his head. Temperature was climbing at a rate that would hit critical in approximately 6 minutes. They wouldn't make it. He unbuckled his harness. "Mr. Brooks, what are you doing?" Garcia shouted. "Fixing the problem." He moved to the engine access panel, the one he'd worked on earlier. He pulled his curved wrench from the leather pouch and opened the panel while the helicopter screamed through the sky at 110 knots. Kyle had asked him earlier why he still carried the wrench. This was why. Because sometimes in the middle of everything going wrong, you needed a tool that could do what no other tool could do. The engine compartment was a nightmare of heat and vibration and noise. Elijah could see the problem now. The oil cooler bypass he'd rigged earlier was starting to slip under the sustained high-speed stress. Not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to reduce cooling efficiency. He reached in his hand, entering a space where temperatures exceeded 400 degrees, where moving parts could tear flesh from bone. His fingers found the connection point. "Mr. Brooks, stop!" Garcia yelled. "You're going to lose your hand." "Rather lose my hand than this bird," Elijah said calmly. He tightened the connection with the curved wrench, his fingers screaming in protest from the heat. The wrench, designed for exactly this kind of impossible access, fit perfectly. He gave it 3/4 of a turn, checked it, half turn more. He pulled his hand back, the skin red and blistering. "Temperature stabilizing," he said into the intercom. "We're good, she'll make it." Rodriguez's voice came back awed. "You just stuck your hand into a running turbine engine at 110 knots. Not the first time. You're absolutely insane." "Probably." Garcia grabbed Elijah's hand, examining the burns. "This needs treatment. 2nd-degree burns on 3 fingers. After we land, how's the general?" Garcia looked back at his patient, and his face was grim. "Barely hanging on. We're down to maybe 5 minutes before his heart gives out completely." Mrs. Harrigan was openly weeping now. Her husband's face blue-tinged, his breathing almost stopped. "Captain," Elijah said quietly, "you need to find more speed somewhere." "There is no more speed. This bird is shaking herself apart as it is." Elijah looked at the general, at his wife, at the medic, desperately trying to keep a dying man alive. He thought about Firebase Ripcord, about flying through mortar fire, about 14 wounded men who shouldn't have survived but did. "Yes, there is," he said. "Drop to 500 feet and follow the terrain. Get out of the headwind." That's insane. At this speed, at that altitude, one mistake, and we're dead. "You're not going to make a mistake." "How do you know that?" "Because you're a pilot, and pilots don't quit. Now drop this bird and fly like you mean it." Rodriguez was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, "Everybody hold on." She pushed the cyclic forward, and Patriot Bell dropped like a stone, falling from 1,000 feet to 500 feet in seconds. Elijah's stomach lurched. Garcia grabbed the stretcher frame to keep from being thrown. "Mrs. Harrigan screamed, but the headwind decreased dramatically, and their airspeed jumped to 120 knots. 3 minutes to hospital," Rodriguez yelled. The landscape was blurring beneath them now. They were flying terrifyingly low, terrifyingly fast in a helicopter that was older than most of the buildings they were passing over. "Come on, girl," Elijah whispered, his burned hand pressed against the fuselage. "Just a little more, just a little further. Don't quit on me now." The engine temperature was holding. Barely. They were seconds from catastrophic failure, but they were holding. 2 minutes, Rodriguez called. Garcia had the AED pads on Harrigan's chest, now ready to shock if when his heart stopped. "John, stay with me," Mrs. Harrigan pleaded. "Please stay with me." 1 minute. Elijah could see the hospital now, the emergency landing pad on the roof, medical staff already waiting. So close. So desperately close. General Harrigan's chest stopped moving. "He's in cardiac arrest," Garcia shouted. He started CPR, pressing down on the general's chest in steady rhythm. "Clear for AED." The machine analyzed. "Shock advised." Garcia pressed the button and Harrigan's body jerked. The AED analyzed again. "Continue CPR. 30 seconds. Rodriguez was lined up on the landing pad. Now her approach steep and fast. Garcia did chest compressions while the helicopter screamed toward the hospital. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5. Patriot Bell flared hard, her nose coming up her forward speed bleeding off. The landing skids touched the pad with a solid thump, and before the rotors even fully spooled down, the hospital trauma team was rushing forward with a gurney. "Male 70 massive MI cardiac arrest approximately 90 seconds ago," Garcia yelled as they transferred Harrigan to the gurney. "1 shock, delivered CPR ongoing." The trauma team took over, rushing the general toward the roof access door. "Mrs." Harrigan ran after them, her face a mask of terror and hope. And then they were gone, disappeared into the hospital, and Elijah was left sitting in the crew compartment of Patriot Bell, his burned hand throbbing, his heart racing, his body flooded with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Rodriguez shut down the engine, and in the sudden relative silence, she turned to look at Elijah. "You just saved that man's life. You're the one who flew. You're the one who kept the bird flying. If that engine had failed..." She shook her head. "I've been flying for 15 years and I've never seen anything like what you just did." Elijah just sat there, suddenly exhausted. Every year of his 75 years felt like it was pressing down on his shoulders. His hand hurt, his back hurt, his knees hurt, everything hurt. But they'd made it. One more mission, one more life saved. "We should get you inside," Rodriguez said, gesturing to his burned hand. "That needs proper treatment." "In a minute. Just give me a minute." He sat in the crew compartment of the helicopter. He'd fixed the helicopter. He'd kept flying the helicopter that had just carried a dying man to the only place that could save him. He ran his good hand along the metal frame, feeling the vibration as the rotors spooled down, feeling the heat of the engine slowly dissipating. "Thank you, girl," he whispered. "You did good. You did real good." His radio crackled. General Michelson's voice came through. "Patriot Bell, this is Fort Holloway Command. Status." Rodriguez keyed her mic. "Command Patriot Bell. We're on the ground at County General. Patient transferred to trauma team. Aircraft is code green. Crew is intact." "Outstanding work, Captain. Brooks, you reading me?" Elijah picked up the crew chief's headset. "I'm here, General. I owe you a debt I can't repay. You got my friend to the hospital alive. Whether he stays alive is up to the doctors now, sir. But he's got a chance. Without you, he wouldn't have had even that. I'm sending a bird to bring you back to base." "Sir, with respect, I'd like to fly this bird back myself. She needs a crew chief for the return flight. Her temperature has been stressed. I need to monitor her." There was a pause, then Michelson's voice came back different, softer. "Understood, Ghost. Bring her home safe." The call sign hit Elijah like a physical blow. He hadn't been called that in 56 years. Hadn't wanted to hear it again. The name carried too much weight, too much memory, too much pain. But sitting in Patriot Bell, his burned hand throbbing his body, exhausted, his mind full of the faces of men he'd saved and men he'd lost. Elijah accepted it. He was Ghost. He'd always been Ghost. And today, one more time, he'd done what ghosts do. Appeared when impossible was needed. Fixed what couldn't be fixed. Saved what shouldn't be saved. Rodriguez was looking at him with something like reverence. "Ghost. That's really your call sign." "Was, long time ago. The crew at Fort Holloway are going to lose their minds when we get back. You're a legend. I'm a tired old man who got lucky today. Luck had nothing to do with it." Elijah stood slowly, his joints protesting. "Let's get my hand looked at, and then get this bird ready for the flight home. She's earned her rest." They climbed out of the helicopter, and Elijah looked back at her one more time. Patriot Bell sat on that hospital rooftop. Her paint faded, her metal scarred, 53 years old, and still saving lives. Just like the man who'd built her heart with his own hands. But the hardest part was still coming. because when they got back to Fort Holloway, Elijah was going to have to face something more difficult than enemy fire or mechanical failure or dying engines. He was going to have to face the past he'd spent 50 years trying to forget. And he was going to have to decide whether Ghost was ready to stop being invisible. The emergency room doctor wrapped Elijah's burned hand in gauze with movements that were efficient but not gentle. Her name tag read Dr. Chen, and she'd been working for 16 hours straight when they'd brought Elijah in. "Second and third degree burns on 3 fingers, she said flatly. "You're lucky you didn't lose them entirely. What were you doing reaching into an oven?" "Something like that," Elijah replied. "You need to keep this clean and dry. Change the dressing twice daily. I'm prescribing antibiotics to prevent infection and pain medication for no pain medication." Dr. Chen looked up sharply. "Mr. Brooks, these burns are going to hurt like hell for the next week. You need—" "I don't take pain medication. Never have. Never will." Something in his voice made her pause. She studied his face, seeing something there. She recognized the look of a man who'd learned to live with pain so long ago that he didn't know any other way. "All right," she said quietly, "but if you change your mind, I won't." She finished wrapping his hand and stepped back. "The general you brought in, Harrigan, he's in surgery now. Triple bypass. They got to him just in time. Another 5 minutes and he wouldn't have made it." Elijah felt something loosen in his chest. "He's going to live. Too early to say for certain, but the surgeons are optimistic. His wife wanted me to tell you thank you. She said you saved her husband's life. I just kept the helicopter running. The pilot did the flying. And the pilot says you're the only reason the helicopter didn't fall out of the sky." Dr. Chen pulled off her latex gloves. "So maybe just accept the thank you, Mr. Brooks." Elijah nodded but didn't say anything. Accepting gratitude had never been something he was good at. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway of the examination room. "They're ready for us at base. General Michelson wants us back ASAP. Says there's something important he needs to discuss with you." "What about—" He wouldn't say, just said it was urgent. They walked out to the rooftop landing pad where Patriot Bell waited. Elijah did a quick visual inspection, checking for any damage from the high-speed flight. Everything looked solid. The engine had cooled properly, no leaks, no loose connections. She'd handled the stress better than he'd expected. "You really love that bird, don't you?" Rodriguez said, watching him work. "She's kept me alive more times than I can count. Yeah, I love her. Same way you love something that's been through hell with you and come out the other side." They climbed in, and Rodriguez went through the startup sequence. The engine caught on the first try, smooth and strong. They lifted off from the hospital rooftop and turned east toward Fort Holloway. The flight back was quieter, calmer. No dying patient, no desperate race against time, just the steady thrum of the rotors and the familiar vibration of the airframe. But Elijah's mind was racing. What did General Michelson want? What was so urgent that it couldn't wait? A sense of unease settled over him, the same feeling he used to get in Vietnam right before everything went sideways. They were 15 minutes from base when Rodriguez's radio crackled. "Patriot Bell, Fort Holloway Tower. Be advised you have a welcoming committee waiting at the airfield. Approximately 200 personnel assembled on the tarmac." Rodriguez glanced back at Elijah. 200 people. What the hell is going on? Elijah's stomach dropped. "Tell them we don't need a welcoming committee. Tell them to clear the tarmac." "Patriot Bell Tower. Negative on clearing the tarmac. General's orders. The general specifically wants—" "I don't care what the general wants," Elijah said, his voice suddenly hard. "Tell him I don't do crowds. Tell him I don't do ceremonies. Tell him to send everyone home." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Brooks, I can't countermand a direct order from—" "Then set us down somewhere else. Find another LZ. I'm not landing in front of 200 people." "Sir, with all respect, we're low on fuel. We need to land at Fort Holloway. There's no alternative." Elijah's jaw clenched so hard Rodriguez could hear his teeth grinding. His hands were shaking, not from age or exhaustion, but from something deeper. Fear. Raw, undiluted fear. "Mr. Brooks, talk to me. What's wrong?" "I can't do this. I can't be that person. I can't be Ghost again." "Why not?" Because Ghost is dead. The words exploded out of him. Ghost died in 1969 on a firebase I can't even remember the name of. Ghost was a kid who thought he was invincible, who thought he could save everyone, who thought if he just worked hard enough and fixed enough birds and flew enough missions, everyone would come home. His voice cracked. But they didn't come home. Half my pilots died. 3/4 of my door gunners died. I watched men burn alive in birds I'd maintained in birds I'd sworn were safe. I watched good people turn into ghosts themselves, hollow-eyed and broken. And when it was finally over, when I finally came home, nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to know about Ghost. They wanted to forget Vietnam ever happened. So I let them forget. I let Ghost disappear, and I've been invisible ever since. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, keeping the helicopter steady, while the broken man in the crew compartment tried to hold himself together. My grandfather flew in Vietnam, she said finally. Door gunner. He never talked about it either. Died when I was 12. My grandmother told me he had nightmares until the day he died, that he'd wake up screaming thinking he was back in the jungle. She said the war never really left him. It doesn't leave, Elijah said softly. It just gets quieter. But it's always there. Always. Is that why you disappeared? Why you let everyone forget? I disappeared because being remembered hurt too much. Every time someone called me Ghost, I saw the faces of men who didn't make it. Every time someone thanked me, I thought about the times I failed, the times the bird went down anyway, the times my fixes weren't good enough. It was easier to just fade away. But you came back today. The general called, said he needed help. Old habits die hard. No, Rodriguez said firmly. You came back because you're still Ghost. You're still the man who climbs out on the skid at 500 feet. You're still the man who fixes the unfixable. You're still the man who saves lives even when it burns your hands to do it. That person didn't die in 1969. That person is sitting in my helicopter right now. Elijah didn't respond, couldn't respond. The truth of her words hurt worse than any burn. We're 5 minutes out, Rodriguez said. I'm going to land on that tarmac. You can stay in the helicopter if you want. You can hide. You can be invisible. But Mr. Brooks, with all respect, I think you've been invisible long enough. She was right. God help him, she was right. But that didn't make it any easier. Fort Holloway appeared ahead, and Elijah could see the crowd assembled near Patriot Bell's original parking spot. Soldiers in uniform, veterans in their old service jackets, base personnel, families with children, all waiting. Tower Patriot Bell on final approach, Rodriguez said. Roger Patriot Bell, welcome home. They descended, and as they got closer, Elijah could see faces in the crowd. Kyle was there front and center. Davidson and Peterson beside him. Lieutenant Wells. Dozens of others he didn't know. And standing at the very front at attention was General Michelson. The skids touched the tarmac with barely a bump. Rodriguez shut down the engine, and in the sudden silence, Elijah could hear the crowd outside. They weren't cheering, weren't applauding. They were just waiting. It's your choice, Rodriguez said quietly. But whatever you decide, I want you to know something. What you did today. Saving General Harrigan. That's not going to be forgotten. Whether you like it or not, Ghost is back. The question is, whether you're going to accept that or spend the rest of your life running from it. She climbed out of the cockpit and through the windscreen. Elijah watched her walk to where General Michelson stood. They exchanged salutes, had a brief conversation, and then Michelson looked directly at the helicopter. At Elijah. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the 20 feet of tarmac. The general's face was impossible to read. Then Michelson raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. And every person on that airfield, soldiers, veterans, civilians, everyone came to attention and saluted. 200 people, standing in the afternoon heat, saluting an old black man in an orange polo shirt and brown cap who was sitting in a 53-year-old helicopter trying not to cry. Elijah felt something break inside him. Not break like shattering, break like a dam finally giving way after holding back too much water for too long. 56 years of silence. 56 years of being invisible. 56 years of carrying weight no one else could see. It all came pouring out. He climbed out of the helicopter slowly, his burned hand throbbing his legs unsteady. The crowd didn't move, didn't drop their salutes. They just waited. Elijah walked forward until he stood in front of General Michelson. His hand came up slowly trembling, and he returned the salute. "Permission to stand down, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Permission granted, Ghost. Welcome home." The general dropped his salute and the crowd erupted, not in cheers or applause, but in something more profound, a kind of collective exhale, like everyone had been holding their breath and could finally let it go. Michelson stepped forward and pulled Elijah into an embrace. "You magnificent bastard. You actually did it. You saved him." "Is he going to make it?" "The hospital called 10 minutes ago. He's out of surgery, stable. They're saying full recovery expected." Michelson pulled back, his eyes wet. "John Harrigan is my oldest friend. We went through flight school together, flew together in Desert Storm, stood up at each other's weddings. If he'd died today, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. I'm glad he made it, sir. Because of you. Because you refused to let that bird quit. Because you're Ghost." The name didn't hurt quite as much this time. Maybe Rodriguez was right. Maybe he'd been running long enough. Kyle approached, his face showing a mixture of awe and shame. "Mr. Brooks, I don't even know what to say. What you did today was beyond anything I've ever seen. You saved a man's life with a wrench and knowledge and sheer determination. You're everything I thought I was, and 1,000 times more." "You'll get there," Elijah said. "You've got the skills. You just need the miles." "Will you teach me? Really teach me? Not just the technical stuff, but the rest of it, the listening, the understanding." Elijah looked at the young technician's eager face and saw himself at 19, fresh out of training, thinking he knew everything. How much pain could he save this kid if he taught him right? How many mistakes could he help him avoid? "Yeah," he said, "I'll teach you, all of you." He gestured to Davidson and Peterson and Wells. "But first, I need to know something. Why all this?" He waved at the assembled crowd. "Why the salutes? Why the ceremony? I just fixed a helicopter and kept her running. That's the job." General Michelson shook his head slowly. "No, Ghost. That's never been just a job for you. It's been a calling. And these people needed to see what that looks like. They needed to see what service really means. Not glory, not medals, not recognition. Just doing what needs to be done because it needs to be done." An older man stepped forward from the crowd, late 70s, wearing a faded 1st Cavalry Division cap. His eyes were wet. "You don't remember me," the man said, his voice shaking. "But I remember you. Firebase Ripcord, June 1968. I was one of the 14 wounded men you flew out in that dead bird you brought back to life. I was 20 years old. I'd taken shrapnel in both legs. The morphine wasn't working. I was screaming. And you held my hand during the flight. You told me I was going to make it. You told me I had a life waiting for me back home." Elijah stared at the man, memory flooding back. "You were the farm kid from Nebraska. Iowa. But yes, David Morrison. You saved my life that night. I went home. I married my high school sweetheart. We had 4 kids, 8 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. I built a good life, Ghost, because of you." Morrison pulled off his cap and wiped his eyes. "For 56 years, I've wanted to say thank you. For 56 years, I've looked for the crew chief named Ghost who flew me out of hell. And today, finally, I can say it. Thank you. Thank you for my life." He held out his hand, and Elijah shook it, his own vision blurring. "You're welcome," Elijah managed. "I'm glad you made it. We all made it, all 14 of us, because of you." Another veteran stepped forward, then another, and another. 5 men total, all in their 70s, all wearing 1st Cav patches, all with tears in their eyes. "We've been looking for you for decades," one of them said. "We formed a group, the Ripcord 14 we called ourselves. We'd meet up every few years, talk about that night, try to find the ghost who saved us. But you disappeared, completely. It was like you never existed." "I wanted to disappear," Elijah said softly. "I wanted to forget. But we couldn't forget. You're part of our story, part of why we're alive. Our children exist because of you. Our grandchildren." When General Michelson put out the word this morning that Ghost was here at Fort Holloway, we all got in our cars and drove. I came from Tennessee, Morrison from Iowa. We had to be here. We had to say thank you. Elijah couldn't speak. The weight of 56 years was crushing him. But for the first time, it didn't feel like burden. It felt like completion, like a circle finally closing. Peterson stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Brooks, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why'd you come back, after 56 years of being invisible? Why answer when General Michelson called?" Elijah looked at the young airman, then at the crowd, then at Patriot Bell sitting silent and powerful behind them. "Because that helicopter is more than metal and fuel. She's history. She's sacrifice. She's proof that we were here, that we mattered, that we did something that meant something. And if she was going to fly again, if she was going to carry that history forward, I needed to make sure she did it right." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But also, because I'm old, and I'm tired, and I've spent too many years carrying ghosts. Maybe it was time to let some of them go. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible." General Michelson cleared his throat. "Ghost, I need to tell you something. Something you're not going to like, but something that needs to happen anyway." Elijah tensed. "What?" "I've contacted the Army Historical Foundation. They want to do a full interview with you, document your service, get your story on record. The Smithsonian wants to talk to you about the modifications you made to the Hueys, get them properly documented for historical preservation. And the Secretary of the Army wants to review your service record because there are about a dozen medals you were recommended for that got lost or downgraded over the years." "No," Elijah said immediately. "No interviews, no medals, no attention. I told you I don't do that." "I understand. But Ghost, listen to me. You're 75 years old. How much longer do you think you have? 10 years, 20 if you're lucky. When you're gone, your knowledge goes with you. Your stories disappear. Your techniques, your modifications, your wisdom, all of it gone. Is that what you want? Is that your legacy?" Silence. The words hit hard because they were true. "What about these kids?" Michelson gestured to Kyle and the others. "What about the next generation? Don't they deserve to learn from you? Don't they deserve to know what real service looks like?" Elijah looked at Kyle's eager face, at Davidson's respectful attention, at Peterson's obvious hero worship, at all the young people who'd gathered to see Ghost come home. "I'm not a hero," he said quietly. "I'm just a mechanic who got lucky." "You're wrong," Kyle said, surprising everyone with the force in his voice. "You're not just a mechanic. You're a teacher. And I need a teacher. We all do. The military's changing, technology's changing, but the fundamentals, the listening, the understanding, the dedication to doing it right because lives depend on it, that doesn't change. And if you don't pass that on, if you disappear again, then we're all poorer for it." David Morrison spoke up again. "Ghost, you gave me 56 years of life I wouldn't have had. Don't you think you owe it to these kids to give them the benefit of your knowledge so they can give life to the people they're going to save?" Elijah felt the weight of all those eyes on him, felt the responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. He'd spent 56 years avoiding this, 56 years being invisible, 56 years running from Ghost. But maybe running wasn't working anymore. "All right," he said, the word coming out rough and reluctant. "I'll do the interviews. I'll talk to the historians. I'll work with these kids and teach them what I know, but on one condition." "Name it," Michelson said. "No medals. I don't want awards. I don't want ceremonies. I just want to work. Let me teach. Let me fix birds. Let me do what I've always done. But don't turn me into something I'm not." Michelson considered this, then nodded. Deal. No medals. But I reserve the right to tell your story. Because people need to hear it. Fine, but tell it honest. But tell them I was scared every single day. Tell them I made mistakes. Tell them I lost people. Tell them Ghost isn't some superhero, just a man who refused to quit, even when quitting made sense. That's the story I'll tell. The crowd began to disperse, people coming up one by one to shake Elijah's hand, to thank him, to tell him their own stories of service and sacrifice. It took an hour before the tarmac finally cleared. When it was just Elijah Rodriguez and the core technical crew left, Kyle approached with something in his hands. Mr. Brooks, we made something for you. I know you said no ceremonies, but this isn't official. This is just from us. He held out a flight jacket. Olive green worn leather 1st Cavalry patch on the shoulder, and on the left breast embroidered in gold thread, Ghost. We found it in the museum archive. It was logged as belonging to an unidentified crew chief from the Vietnam era. But the size matches you. And there's a repair in the sleeve, looks like it was done with the same kind of stitching you used on Patriot Bell's fuel line. We think this might have been yours. Elijah took the jacket with trembling hands. The leather was soft, familiar. He turned it over and found the hole in the sleeve, the careful repair work he'd done 56 years ago after a piece of shrapnel had torn through it. This is mine, he whispered. I thought it was lost. I thought everything from that time was lost. It wasn't lost, just waiting, like you were. Elijah slipped the jacket on, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all these years for him to come back and claim it. The weight of it on his shoulders felt right, felt like coming home. Thank you, he said, and this time accepting gratitude didn't hurt quite so much. Rodriguez stepped forward. Mr. Brooks, I put in a request with General Michelson. I want you as my permanent crew chief. Every time I fly Patriot Bell, I want you in that crew compartment. Will you do it? I'm 75 years old. I'm slow. I'm half deaf. My hands shake. Your hands don't shake when it matters, and you kept that bird flying when I thought we were going down. I trust you with my life. Will you fly with me? Elijah looked at her, at this capable pilot who'd flown like a demon when it counted, who'd trusted him when she had no reason to, who'd helped him stop running. Yeah, he said. I'll fly with you. The sun was setting now, painting the sky orange and purple. Patriot Bell sat silhouetted against the colors, beautiful and powerful and alive. She needs a full maintenance check after today, Elijah said, walking toward the helicopter. That run stressed a lot of systems. I need to verify everything's solid before we fly her again. Tomorrow, Kyle said. Tonight, the general's ordered a full stand down. He wants everyone rested, including you. I don't need rest. I need to check my bird. Mr. Brooks, Davidson said gently, the bird can wait. You've earned a rest. Take it. Elijah wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up to him. His burned hand throbbed. His back ached. His legs felt like rubber. He'd been running on adrenaline for hours, and now that it was fading, the crash was hitting hard. All right, he conceded. Tomorrow. First thing. First thing, Kyle agreed. And sir, thank you. For everything. For fixing the bird. For saving General Harrigan. For coming back. For being Ghost. Elijah looked at the young technician, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't expected: genuine respect. Not pity, not awe, just respect, man to man, mechanic to mechanic. You're going to be good at this, Elijah said. Better than me, probably. You've got the education I never had. You've got the tools I never had. You've got a future I never imagined. But don't forget the fundamentals. Listen to the machines, respect them, and never, ever stop learning. I won't, I promise. They walked away from Patriot Bell as the sun finally set, as the base lights flickered on, as another day ended, and a new chapter began. But Elijah looked back one more time at the helicopter that had carried him through hell, and back at the bird that had brought him home after 56 years of exile. Sleep well, girl, he whispered. Tomorrow we fly again. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Elijah Brooks wasn't afraid of tomorrow. He was ready for it. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He tried. Lay in the guest quarters. General Michelson had arranged for him. Stared at the ceiling, listened to the sounds of the base settling into darkness. But every time he closed his eyes, he was back in Vietnam, back in the jungle, back in birds that were falling apart around him while men screamed and died. At 0400 hours, he gave up. Put on his orange polo shirt and brown cap, slipped into the flight jacket with Ghost embroidered on it, and walked across the dark base toward the hangar where Patriot Bell waited. The guard at the gate saluted when he saw the jacket. "Mr. Brooks, didn't expect anyone out here this early. Couldn't sleep, figured I'd check on the bird. General left orders you're to have unrestricted access, anytime, day or night." The guard unlocked the hangar door. "Need anything, sir, just holler." Elijah stepped into the hangar, and the motion sensor lights flickered on one by one, revealing Patriot Bell sitting exactly where they'd left her. In the harsh fluorescent light, she looked older, more worn, all her scars visible, just like him. He walked to her, slowly running his good hand along the fuselage. His burned hand throbbed under the bandages, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you something was wrong, but didn't mean you had to stop. "Just you and me, girl," he said quietly, "like old times." He pulled his leather pouch from his jacket pocket, extracted his tools, and began a complete mechanical inspection. Started with the engine, checking every connection he'd made yesterday, verifying nothing had loosened during the high-speed flight. Moved to the transmission, the hydraulics, the fuel system, the electrical. Each component got his full attention, his experienced hands finding things no diagnostic computer would ever notice. He was deep in the tail rotor assembly when he heard footsteps behind him. "Thought I might find you here." Elijah turned to see Kyle standing in the hangar entrance holding 2 cups of coffee. The young technician looked tired, like maybe he hadn't slept much either. "You're up early," Elijah said. "So are you." Kyle walked over and handed him one of the coffees. Figured if Ghost was going to be working at 4 in the morning, somebody should keep him company. Elijah took the coffee gratefully. "You don't have to babysit me." "I'm not babysitting, I'm learning. You said you'd teach me. I'm ready to start." Despite himself, Elijah smiled. "All right then, tell me what you see when you look at this tail rotor assembly." Kyle studied it carefully, his engineer's brain cataloging components. Drive shaft looks solid. Gearbox housing shows normal wear. Pitch control mechanism is responding correctly. Everything reads as functional. Now stop looking and start listening. Listening to what? To what she's trying to tell you. Kyle looked confused, but he closed his eyes and listened. At first, all he heard was the ambient noise of the hangar, the hum of lights, the distant sound of the air conditioning, nothing useful. "I don't hear anything." "You're listening for sound. Listen for silence. Listen for what's not there." Kyle tried again, focusing differently this time, and slowly he began to hear it, or rather not hear it. A slight hesitation in the freewheeling unit, not enough to show up on any diagnostic, just a tiny fraction of delay that shouldn't exist. "There's something in the clutch mechanism," he said slowly. "Something's catching, just barely." Elijah's smile widened. "There you go. Now you're listening." "But how did you know you weren't even near it when you heard it?" "Because I've heard it before, thousands of times. When you work on these birds long enough, you learn their language. Every sound means something. Every vibration tells a story. Your computers can tell you what's wrong after it breaks. Listening tells you what's about to break before it does." Kyle pulled out his phone and started taking notes. "So what's causing the catch?" "Probably a worn synchronizer in the freewheeling clutch. Not critical yet, but in another 50 flight hours it'll fail completely. We replace it now while we can do it controlled instead of waiting for it to fail in flight." "I'll order the part." "Good. While you're at it, order new hydraulic seals for the collective control. They're still working, but they're old. I can feel the degradation. And get me a new set of spark igniters for the engine. The ones in there are original from 1966. They're miracles they still work." Kyle typed rapidly on his phone. "Done. Parts will be here by noon. Mr. Brooks, can I ask you something?" Go ahead. Yesterday, when you stuck your hand into that running engine at 110 knots, when you did that bypass repair, you could have died. You could have lost your hand. Why did you do it? Elijah took a sip of coffee, choosing his words carefully. Because General Harrigan was dying, and if that engine failed, he died for certain. So the choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was just what needed to be done. But you didn't hesitate. You didn't even think about it. I thought about it. I thought about it the whole time my hand was in there. But thinking about danger and letting it stop you are two different things. Kyle was quiet for a moment. I don't think I could do that. I don't think I'm that brave. Bravery isn't not being afraid. Bravery is being terrified and doing it anyway because someone's life depends on it. Elijah looked at the young man. You want to know the truth. Every mission I flew in Vietnam, I was scared. Every single one. But I flew them because the alternative, letting good people die because I was too afraid, that was worse than any fear. Is that what ghost means? Someone who fights through fear. Ghost means someone who does what needs doing and then disappears. No credit, no recognition, just the work. Elijah paused. At least that's what it used to mean. I think maybe it means something different now. What does it mean now? Before Elijah could answer, the hangar door burst open and Peterson ran in his face, urgent. Mr. Brooks, they need you at the command center. Right now. There's been an incident. Elijah's blood went cold. What kind of incident? Training exercise gone wrong. 2 helicopters collided during a night navigation drill. One crashed completely, crew didn't make it. The other is damaged, lost hydraulics pilots trying to limp it back to base, but they're not sure it'll make it. ETA 12 minutes. They're calling for all available maintenance personnel. Kyle was already moving. I'll get the emergency response team mobilized. Wait, Elijah said. What kind of helicopter? UH-60 Blackhawk. Modern bird, all fly-by-wire systems, computerized controls. Then I can't help. I don't know those systems. I'm 50 years out of date. Peterson looked desperate. Mr. Brooks, the pilot, says the computer's giving conflicting commands. The fly-by-wire is fighting him. He's having to force the controls manually, but it's not responding right. They're saying if someone doesn't figure out what's wrong before he lands, the bird's going to auger in on touchdown. Elijah felt something twist in his gut. A damaged bird. A pilot fighting for control. A machine that wouldn't listen. It was Vietnam all over again, just with newer technology. How bad is the damage? Tail rotor took the worst of it in the collision. They've got maybe 60% control authority. Hydraulics are leaking. The computer keeps trying to compensate, but it's overcorrecting. That was the problem right there. Elijah could hear it in the description. The computer was trying to help, but making things worse because it couldn't understand the actual physical damage. I need to talk to the pilot, now. They ran to the command center where organized chaos reigned. Radio operators, supervisors, General Michelson all clustered around communication equipment. On the screens, they could see the damaged Blackhawk's position 11 minutes out and losing altitude slowly. Michelson saw Elijah, and relief flooded his face. Ghost, thank God. We've got a bird trying not to crash, and the pilot's running out of options. Let me talk to him. Michelson handed over the radio. Wounded Bird 2. This is Fort Holloway Command. I have our senior crew chief on the line. Call sign Ghost. He needs to ask you some questions. The pilot's voice came back strained, breathing hard. Copy command. Wounded Bird 2, ready to copy. Son, this is Ghost. I need you to trust me and answer exactly what I ask. Can you do that? Copy Ghost. I'll try. Don't try. Do. Your life depends on it. Now tell me exactly what the controls are doing. The cyclic is fighting me. Every time I input a command, the computer counters it. If I push forward, it pulls back. If I bank left, it tries to level out. I'm having to force everything. And the collective responding but sluggish, like there's resistance. That's the hydraulics failing. How's your tail rotor response? Terrible. Maybe half effectiveness. I have to use twice the pedal input to get any yaw control. Elijah closed his eyes, visualizing the problem. Modern helicopters had computers managing everything, trying to keep the aircraft stable. But when you had physical damage like this, the computer couldn't understand that its sensors were lying. It kept trying to correct for problems that weren't there while ignoring the problems that were. Listen to me carefully. You need to override the flight computer. Switch to direct mechanical control. Ghost, if I do that, I lose all the stability augmentation. The bird's going to kill you if you don't. That computer's fighting you because it doesn't understand the damage. You understand the damage. Your hands know what's wrong. Trust yourself, not the machine. There was silence on the radio. Elijah could imagine the pilot's dilemma. Everything in modern flight training said trust the computer, trust the systems. But those systems were designed for normal operations, not catastrophic damage. Ghost, I don't know if I can fly her manually, not with this much damage. Yes, you can. You're a pilot. That means something. It means when the technology fails, when the computers quit, when everything goes to hell, you still have your hands and your skill and your will. Now switch to manual and fly your bird. Another pause. Then, copy Ghost, switching to manual control now. On the screen, they watched the helicopter's flight path waver as the pilot took direct control. For a moment, it looked like he was going to lose it, the bird starting to spin. Easy, Elijah said into the radio, his voice calm despite the tension in the room. Don't overcorrect. Small inputs. Feel what she's telling you. She's damaged, but she's still flying. Work with her, not against her. I'm getting it. She's responding better now. Still heavy, still fighting, but I can feel her. Good. Now you're going to have a problem on landing. With that tail rotor damage, when you reduce collective to descend, you're going to get torque roll. The bird's going to want to spin right. You'll need left pedal, lots of it, constant pressure to keep her straight. Copy that. And when you flare for landing, the nose is going to want to pitch up hard. The computer would normally compensate, but you're manual now. You'll need forward cyclic pressure right before touchdown. How much? You'll know. Your hands will tell you. Trust them. The helicopter was 5 minutes out now. They could see it on the distant horizon, its approach angle steeper than normal, its flight path wavering. Rodriguez appeared beside Elijah. I should be flying that bird. I should be the one talking him down. You're a pilot. He's a pilot. He needs to hear this from someone who's kept broken birds flying. He needs Ghost. The radio crackled. Ghost, I'm 3 minutes out, starting my approach. Copy. Remember what I told you. Small inputs. Feel the bird. Trust yourself. Everyone in the command center was silent, watching the screens, listening to the radio. Kyle stood next to Elijah, his face pale. Davidson had her hands clasped like she was praying. Peterson's eyes were locked on the screen. 2 minutes. Altitude 1,000 feet. Descending. Good. How's she handling? Heavy. Really heavy on the controls. And I'm starting to get the torque roll you mentioned. Left pedal's almost maxed out. That's normal for the damage you've got. Just maintain pressure. Don't let her spin on you. Copy. 1 minute out. On the screen, they could see the helicopter clearly now approaching fast, its nose pitched at an odd angle, its flight path barely controlled. Crash trucks were racing toward the landing zone. Medical personnel stood ready. 30 seconds. Beginning final approach. Elijah could hear the strain in the pilot's voice. Could hear the fear. The same fear he'd heard in the voices of 100 pilots fighting dying birds. You've got this, he said firmly. You're going to make it. Commit to the landing. Don't second-guess yourself. Flaring now. Getting the pitch up you mentioned. Pushing forward on cyclic. The helicopter's nose dropped, fighting the natural tendency to flip backward. The pilot was fighting the controls with everything he had, muscles straining, sweat pouring down his face. Torque roll increasing. Full left pedal. I can't hold it much longer. You don't need much longer. 5 seconds. 4, 3. Ease off collective. Let her settle. 2 seconds. 1. Contact. The helicopter hit the ground hard, bounced once, slammed down again. The tail swung violently, right then left. For a horrible moment, it looked like it was going to roll over. Then it settled. Still, the rotors spooling down, silence on the radio. Wounded Bird 2 report status, Michelson called urgently. Nothing. Wounded Bird 2 respond. Kyle's hands were clenched into fists. Davidson wasn't breathing. Then finally the pilot's voice came back shaking but alive. Command Wounded Bird 2. We're down. We're safe. Aircraft is damaged, but crew is uninjured. We made it. The command center erupted in cheers. People were hugging, crying, celebrating. But Elijah just stood there, the radio still in his hand, feeling the familiar mixture of relief and exhaustion that came after every mission. One more bird saved. One more crew alive. One more impossible landing made possible. Rodriguez grabbed his shoulders. You did it. You talked him down. He did it. He flew the bird. I just gave him permission to trust himself. General Michelson was grinning, his eyes wet. Ghost. That's the second life you've saved in 24 hours. You're making a habit of this. Old habits die hard, sir. The pilot's voice came back on the radio, calmer now. Ghost, this is Lieutenant Commander James Chen, Wounded Bird 2. I don't know who you are, but you just saved my life and my crew's lives. I want to shake your hand when I get back there. You can shake my hand after you get checked by the medics. Make sure you're really okay. Copy that. And Ghost, thank you for trusting me when I didn't trust myself. Elijah handed the radio back to Michelson, suddenly feeling every one of his 75 years. His burned hand was throbbing. His back ached. His heart was racing from the adrenaline, but he was smiling. Kyle was staring at him with something like awe. Mr. Brooks, how did you know what to tell him? You said yourself you don't know modern systems. I don't need to know the systems. I need to know pilots. I need to know what happens when machinery breaks and humans have to take over. That's never changed. That'll never change. But you couldn't even see the helicopter. You were just listening to his voice and visualizing the problem. That's what crew chiefs do. We listen. We understand. We help pilots do the impossible. Elijah looked at Kyle seriously. And that's what you're going to learn. Not just how to fix machines, but how to help the people who fly them. How to be the voice in their ear that says you can do this when everything's falling apart. Peterson spoke up. Mr. Brooks, they're going to want to debrief you, want to know how you did it. This is going to be studied, analyzed, turned into training material. Good. Let them study it. Let them learn. That's the whole point. Elijah turned to Michelson. General, I have a request. Name it. I want to start a program. Training for crew chiefs and maintenance personnel. Not just the technical stuff, but the rest of it. The listening, the understanding, the relationship between human and machine. Call it the Ghost Protocol or whatever you want, but I want to teach people what I know before it's too late. Michelson didn't hesitate. Done. I'll allocate resources immediately. You tell me what you need. I need these kids. Elijah gestured to Kyle Davidson and Peterson. They're smart. They're eager. They're willing to learn. They'll be my first class. And I need access to birds like Patriot Bell, real machines with real history. You can't learn this stuff on simulators. You'll have everything you need, whatever it takes. Rodriguez stepped forward. I want in too, from the pilot perspective. If you're teaching crew chiefs to understand pilots, pilots need to understand crew chiefs. You're hired. The door burst open, and Lieutenant Commander Chen limped in, still wearing his flight suit, surrounded by medics trying to check him over. His face was bruised, his hands were shaking, but he was alive. He saw Elijah and walked straight to him, ignoring the medics' protests. You're Ghost. I am. Chen held out his hand, and Elijah shook it. I want you to know something. When I was fighting those controls, when the computer was fighting me, when I thought I was going to die, your voice was the only thing keeping me focused. You gave me the confidence to trust myself. You saved my life. You saved your own life. I just reminded you that you could. No, it was more than that. When I switched to manual control and felt that bird responding to my hands instead of the computer, I understood something I'd never really gotten before. The machine isn't the pilot. The pilot is the pilot. The machine is just the tool. That's exactly right. Chen looked at Elijah's flight jacket at the Ghost embroidered on it at the 1st Cavalry patch. You flew in Vietnam. I did. Were you really called Ghost? I was. Because you could fix anything. Elijah was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the birds he'd saved and all the birds he'd lost, all the men who'd lived and all the men who'd died, all the years of silence and all the ghosts he'd carried. "Because I kept the dead flying," he said finally. "Because I refused to let anything stay broken. Because when everyone else said it was impossible, I found a way." Chen's voice dropped low. "They're saying I should have ejected. That trying to land the bird was too risky. That I should have abandoned it and parachuted down. But you didn't." "No, because you told me I could save it, and I trusted you. I told you that you could save yourself. The bird was just the vehicle, but I'm glad you brought her home. She's damaged, but she's repairable. That means something." "It means everything," Chen said. "It means we don't give up. Not on machines, not on people, not on ourselves." Elijah looked at this young pilot, seeing himself again at 24, seeing all the lessons he'd learned written on another generation's face. "You're going to be a good pilot," he said. "Better than good, because you learned something today that most pilots never learn. You learned that technology serves us, not the other way around. You learned to trust yourself. Hold on to that." "I will." "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you were in Vietnam, when you were Ghost, did you ever lose a bird? Did you ever fail?" The question hit Elijah like a physical blow. For a moment, he was back there, back in that valley, back on that fire base, back in that moment when Sweet Caroline went down and Gutierrez died, and nothing he did was enough. "Yes," he said quietly. "I lost birds. I lost men. I failed more times than I can count. But you kept flying. I kept flying because the alternative was letting more men die. Because every bird I saved was one more chance for someone to come home. Because—" his voice cracked slightly. "Because Gutierrez died on my bird and I couldn't let his death be for nothing. So I kept flying, kept fixing, kept fighting. Not because I was brave, because I was too stubborn to quit." Chen nodded slowly, understanding something fundamental. That's what Ghost really means. Not someone who never fails. Someone who fails and keeps going anyway. "Yeah," Elijah said. "That's exactly what it means." The medics finally convinced Chen to go to the hospital for a full evaluation. As he left, he turned back one more time. "Ghost, I'm going to tell my crew about you, about what you taught me today. And someday when I'm training new pilots, I'm going to teach them what you taught me. To trust themselves, to listen to the machine, to never give up. You do that. Pass it forward. That's how the work continues." After Chen left, the command center slowly emptied until it was just Elijah Kyle and General Michelson. "2 saves in 24 hours, Michelson said. "You're making me look good, Ghost." "I'm making myself exhausted, General. I'm too old for this much excitement." "No, you're not. You're exactly the right age. Old enough to have the wisdom. Young enough to still care." Michelson became serious. "Ghost, I need to tell you something. General Harrigan woke up this morning. First thing he said was, 'Where's the crew chief who kept that bird flying? He wants to meet you. He should focus on recovery, not—' He says he's not leaving that hospital until he can shake your hand. Says he owes you his life. He owes the doctors his life. He owes Rodriguez her skill. I just did maintenance. Ghost, when are you going to accept that you're allowed to be thanked, that you're allowed to be recognized, that you're allowed to matter?" The question hung in the air between them. "I don't know," Elijah admitted. "I've spent 56 years being invisible. It's hard to suddenly be visible again." "Then start small. Visit Harrigan. Let him say thank you. Let his wife thank you. Let the people whose lives you've saved actually acknowledge what you've done. You don't have to be Ghost the legend. Just be Elijah Brooks, the man who helps people." Elijah thought about this. Thought about David Morrison and the Ripcord 14. Thought about Lieutenant Commander Chen. Thought about all the people he'd helped over the years who'd never had the chance to say thank you. "All right," he said. "I'll visit the hospital." "Good. And Ghost, the program you want to start, the training initiative, I'm making it official. The Ghost Protocol. Funded, staffed, full military backing. You'll have everything you need to teach the next generation." Kyle's face lit up. "Really? This is really happening?" It's really happening, Michelson confirmed. Brooks, you've got carte blanche. Build the program however you think it should be built. Teach whatever you think needs to be taught. Turn these kids into crew chiefs who can keep the impossible flying. Elijah felt something shift inside him, something that had been frozen for decades, finally thawing. I'll need Patriot Bell as the primary training aircraft. She's got every modification, every fix, every trick I've ever learned. She's the perfect teaching tool. She's yours, along with any other aircraft you want to use. And I'll need my crew. Elijah looked at Kyle. You Davidson, Peterson, Rodriguez. Full time. No distractions. If we're going to do this right, I need people who are committed. Kyle didn't hesitate. I'm in. Whatever you need, I'm there. Me too, Peterson said from the doorway where he'd been listening. I want to learn everything you can teach me. Davidson appeared beside him. Count me in. This is exactly what the military needs. Michelson smiled. Then it settled. The Ghost Protocol officially launches tomorrow. Brooks, you're in charge. Build me a program that'll change how we train crew chiefs for the next 50 years. Elijah felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose, like meaning, like everything he'd survived, everything he'd learned, everything he'd carried all these years was finally going to matter. I'll build something that lasts, he said. Something that honors the men who didn't make it home. Something that makes sure their sacrifice meant something. That's all I could ask for. They walked out of the command center into the early morning light. The sun was rising, painting the base in gold and orange. In the distance, Patriot Bell sat in her hangar waiting. Around them, the base was waking up another day, beginning the machinery of military life grinding forward. But something fundamental had changed. Ghost was no longer invisible. The forgotten veteran was forgotten no more. And the knowledge that had been locked in one old man's head was about to be shared with a generation that desperately needed it. Kyle walked beside Elijah, matching his pace. Mr. Brooks, can I ask you one more question? Sure. Yesterday morning, when you first showed up at that helicopter when we were all mocking you and dismissing you, did you ever think about just walking away, just letting us fail? Elijah thought about this carefully. Yeah, I thought about it. Thought about how easy it would be to just disappear again, to stay invisible, to let the young people figure it out on their own like I had to. Why didn't you? Because Patriot Bell deserved better. Because General Michelson trusted me enough to call. Because somewhere in the back of my mind I knew that if I walked away, if I stayed invisible, then everything I'd learned would die with me. And I couldn't let that happen. I'm glad you didn't walk away. Me too, kid. Me too. They reached the hangar where Patriot Bell waited. Elijah walked to her, placed his hand on her fuselage one more time, feeling the cool metal under his palm. You and me, girl, he said softly. We've got work to do. We've got people to teach. We've got a legacy to build. You ready? The helicopter, of course, didn't answer, but in the morning light, with her rotors gleaming and her paint reflecting the sunrise, she looked ready. Ready to fly, ready to teach, ready to matter again, just like the man who'd brought her back to life. Elijah Brooks had spent 56 years being ghost, invisible, forgotten, carrying weight no one else could see. But standing in that hangar, surrounded by young people who wanted to learn with a helicopter that held half a century of history and a general who believed in second chances, he understood something fundamental. Ghost wasn't about being invisible anymore. Ghost was about making sure no one else had to be invisible. Ghost was about passing forward the hard-won knowledge so the next generation could fly higher, fix better, save more lives. Ghost was about turning pain into purpose, silence into teaching, and years of lonely exile into something that mattered. All right, he said to Kyle, to Peterson, to Davidson, to Rodriguez, to all of them. Let's get to work. We've got helicopters to fix, pilots to train, and lives to save. The Ghost Protocol starts now. And as the sun rose fully over Fort Holloway, as Patriot Bell sat ready in her hangar, as a new generation prepared to learn from a forgotten veteran who'd finally come home, one truth became absolutely clear. Some ghosts don't haunt. Some ghosts teach. And the ones who teach change everything.